It was upon a dreary Tuesday in the November of '95 that the affair which I have chosen to call the case of the fashionably dressed young girl first came to our attention. A persistent, weeping fog had descended upon London, cloaking our great city in a shroud of grey mystery so thick that the gas lamps across Baker Street appeared as no more than faint, ethereal smudges against the gloom. Inside our lodgings at 221B, however, the atmosphere was one of comfortable warmth, punctuated by the crackling of the fire and the dense, acrid clouds of shag tobacco emanating from my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. He had been in one of his blackest moods for a week past, a direct consequence of the utter dearth of stimulating crime in the daily papers. The criminal classes of London, it seemed, had entered into a period of regrettable indolence, leaving Holmes to pace our sitting room like a caged tiger, his brilliant mind turning inwards upon itself for lack of a worthy problem to solve. He had alternated between scraping mournful discordant airs upon his violin and conducting a series of particularly malodorous chemical experiments which had driven our good landlady, Mrs. Hudson, to the brink of despair. "Watson, the world is enshrouded in fog, both literal and intellectual," he had declared that morning, gesturing with the stem of his clay pipe towards the swirling vapours outside our window. "It is a fitting metaphor for the current state of human affairs. Mediocrity reigns. There is no longer any art in wickedness, no audacity, no grandeur. It is all so terribly, terribly dull." I had just set down the British Medical Journal and was about to offer some placating remark when the sharp peal of our doorbell cut through the quiet of the morning. Holmes, who had been slumped in his armchair, sat bolt upright, a flicker of interest finally animating his hawk-like features. "At last, Watson. A footstep upon the stair. A client, I should hope, and not merely another of Mrs. Hudson's acquaintances come to complain about the odours. Observe the tread. It is light, yet hurried. A woman in some distress, but one accustomed to command. She is young, I should venture, and of some social standing." He had barely finished his pronouncement when a sharp rap came upon our door. Upon my call to enter, Mrs. Hudson showed in a young lady of such striking appearance that I confess I rose instinctively to my feet. She could not have been more than 22, with a cascade of rich auburn hair pinned beneath a most elegant hat of velvet and egret feathers. Her travelling coat was of the finest wool, trimmed with sable, and cut in the very latest Parisian fashion. Every detail of her attire, from her kid-leather gloves to the polished tips of her boots, bespoke wealth and impeccable taste. Yet her face, which was of a classical and delicate beauty, was deathly pale, and her large violet eyes were wide with an expression of profound anxiety. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" she asked, her voice a tremor of controlled panic. "I am he," said my friend, rising and indicating the client's chair with a sweep of his hand. "And this is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson. Pray be seated, madam. You have, I perceive, travelled here in a hansom cab, and you are in a state of considerable agitation concerning the welfare of a gentleman, likely a fiancé, who works with intricate mechanical devices." Our visitor gasped, sinking into the chair as if her legs could no longer support her. "Sir, it is as if you have read my very soul. How could you possibly know all this?" Holmes smiled his thin, wintry smile. "The matter is simplicity itself," he said, settling back into his own chair and steepling his long, thin fingers. "Your boots, though immaculately polished, bear upon the instep a small circular spatter of mud of a particular yellow clay. Such mud is only thrown up by the wheels of a hansom when it turns a corner at speed, and your haste is evident in your breathing and the tremor in your hand. The faint yet distinct scent of machine oil and brass polish upon your left glove suggests you have recently handled an object crafted by an engineer or inventor. As for his being your fiancée, he added with a twinkle in his eye, the presence of a magnificent sapphire and diamond engagement ring upon your finger, combined with the depth of your distress, makes that a most reasonable deduction. Now, pray, tell us what has befallen Mr. Alistair Finch, she supplied, her voice choked with emotion, and I am Miss Eleanor Vance. Oh, Mr. Holmes, you must help me. Alistair has vanished. She proceeded to unfold a most singular and alarming tale. Mr. Alistair Finch was, as Holmes had surmised, a brilliant young inventor. He had recently, after years of toil, perfected a new type of gyroscopic stabilizer for maritime vessels. According to Miss Vance, this invention was revolutionary, capable of keeping a ship perfectly level even in the most tempestuous seas. The Admiralty had expressed keen interest, and a lucrative contract that would make Alistair's fortune was all but secured. He works from a private workshop he has rented in a mews near Bloomsbury, Miss Vance explained, twisting a lace handkerchief in her gloved hands. He is a man of precise habits. We were to dine at my family's home in Kensington last evening at 8 o'clock. When he did not arrive, I was concerned. When by 10 o'clock there was still no word, I became dreadfully alarmed. Alistair is the soul of punctuality. I sent a footman to his lodgings, but he was not there. This morning, frantic with worry, I took a cab to his workshop. And that, Mr. Holmes, is where I found... Her voice broke. She paused to compose herself before continuing. The door was unlocked. The workshop was in a state of some disarray, not calamitous, but papers were scattered and a stool was overturned. Of Alistair there was no sign, but on his main workbench, lying atop the schematic drawings for his stabilizer, was this. She opened her reticule and carefully placed a small, grim object upon the table between us. It was a man's thumb. I confess that even I, a medical man accustomed to the grim sights of the dissecting room and the battlefield, felt a jolt of horror. The thumb was severed cleanly at the first knuckle, and though it was cold and pale, it was undoubtedly human. Holmes, however, leaned forward, his face alight with that fierce intellectual curiosity that so transformed him in the presence of the bizarre. He produced a powerful magnifying lens from his pocket and examined the grisly relic with an unnerving detachment. "Fascinating," he murmured, more to himself than to us. "Severed with a heavy, sharp blade. A butcher's cleaver, perhaps, or a surgical instrument. The victim is, or was, a man in his late 20s or early 30s, in good health. The nail is well manicured, suggesting a gentleman. Yet there are calluses on the pad consistent with one who performs fine manual work. This is almost certainly the thumb of your Mr. Finch." He turned his piercing gaze back to Miss Vance. "Tell me, madam, did you touch anything else in the workshop?" "No, sir. I saw that, and I fled in terror. I came directly here." "A wise decision. Was anything missing? The schematics, for instance?" "I cannot say for certain," she replied. "They were on the workbench, as I said. I was in no state to make a detailed inventory." "Oh, Mr. Holmes, do you think he has been murdered?" "It is a possibility we must consider. Holmes said gravely. However, the placement of the thumb is highly theatrical. It is a message. The question is, what does it signify? A threat? A warning? Or proof of a kidnapping? Tell me, Miss Vance, did Mr. Finch have any enemies? Alistair? He is the kindest, gentlest man alive. He would not harm a fly. The world of invention is a competitive one, Holmes pressed. Was there any rival who might covet his creation? Miss Vance hesitated for a moment. Well, she said slowly, there is Sir Gideon Croft. He is a prominent industrialist who has been working on a similar, though far inferior, stabilizing mechanism for years. He tried to buy Alistair's patent some months ago, but Alistair refused. Sir Gideon was most displeased. He is known to be a ruthless man. Sir Gideon Croft, Holmes repeated, filing the name away in the vast index of his mind. And what of Mr. Finch's personal life? Any old attachments? Any secrets he might have kept from you? Miss Vance stiffened slightly. I believe I knew everything of importance about my fiancé, Mr. Holmes. Our relationship was one of perfect trust. Holmes observed her for a long moment, his eyes narrowed. Very well, Miss Vance. I shall take up your case. The first step is a visit to the scene of the crime. Watson, you will be good enough to accompany me. Madam, I must ask you to return to your home and speak to no one of this matter. The police must not be involved at this stage. Their clumsy methods would only serve to trample any delicate clues that may remain. I shall be in touch before the day is out. After showing our distraught client to the door, Holmes turned to me, his lethargy utterly vanished, replaced by the vibrant energy of a hound on the scent. Quick, Watson, your hat and coat. There is not a moment to lose. The game, as they say, is afoot. Within minutes, we were rattling through the foggy streets in a four-wheeler, heading towards Bloomsbury. The mews where Alistair Finch kept his workshop was a quiet, cobbled lane tucked behind a row of grand Georgian houses. The workshop itself occupied a converted stable, its wide doors painted a dark green. Holmes produced a slender set of keys from his pocket, and after a moment's manipulation, the lock clicked open. A simple Chubb lock, he remarked. Hardly a challenge for a determined miscreant. The interior was a single large room, redolent with the smell of oil, metal filings, and hot solder. A large workbench dominated the centre, littered with brass cogs, wires, and complex-looking tools. As Miss Vance had described, a stool lay on its side, and a sheaf of papers, the technical drawings of the gyroscopic stabilizer, were spread across the bench. A cursory glance showed them to be intact. While I surveyed the general scene, Holmes was already on his hands and knees, a lens pressed to his eye, crawling about the floor with the intensity of a bloodhound. "Ah, Watson, what do we have here?" he called out, his voice muffled. "Come and see." I knelt beside him. He was pointing at a series of faint scratches on the wooden floorboards near the door. "Observe," he said. "These are not random marks. They are deep and parallel, as if a heavy object with metal feet has been dragged across the floor. A trunk, perhaps? A large crate?" He moved further into the room, his eyes scanning every inch of the floor. "And here, footprints. Several sets. One set belongs to our Mr. Finch, identifiable by the distinctive wear on the heel of his left boot, a pattern I noted on another pair of his boots in the corner. Another set is of a large, heavy-soled boot, belonging to a man of considerable bulk. And a third is most curious, a smaller, more elegant shoe, but one which has left a faint, almost imperceptible trace of something dark and powdery. He carefully scraped a minuscule sample of the powder into a small envelope. We shall examine this later. Now let us turn our attention to the workbench. He rose and began a systematic examination of the tools and papers. There was no sign of the grisly object Miss Vance had brought us. The perpetrators had clearly left it for her to find and then returned to remove it. Or perhaps she had imagined its location in her panic. Holmes sniffed at the air around the bench. A faint odour, Watson, quite distinct from the workshop's usual smells. An aromatic tobacco of a type favoured in the East. Turkish, I believe. He spent a full half-hour in silent, concentrated study, peering at everything, touching nothing. He examined the filings on the floor, the contents of a wastepaper basket, and the cold ashes in a small, pot-bellied stove. Finally, he straightened up, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. "The outlines of the case begin to emerge, Watson," he declared. Mr. Finch was not set upon by common thugs. This was a planned and professionally executed abduction. He was likely subdued and then removed from the premises inside a large travelling trunk. There were at least two abductors, one large and brutish, the other smaller and more refined. And I believe I know where our investigation must lead us next. "To Sir Gideon Croft?" I ventured. "Precisely, my dear Watson. He has the motive and the means. We shall pay a call on this ruthless industrialist and see if he flinches when we apply a little pressure." Sir Gideon Croft's manufactory was a vast, soot-stained edifice in the less fashionable district of Lambeth. The air around it hummed with the ceaseless din of machinery, and plumes of black smoke billowed from its tall chimneys, merging with the already oppressive fog. Sir Gideon himself was a man who seemed forged from the same iron as his factory, large, powerful, with a brutish, square-jawed face and cold, calculating eyes. He received us in a cavernous office, furnished with heavy dark oak, its walls adorned with diagrams of engines and turbines. "Mr. Holmes," he boomed, not bothering to rise from behind his enormous desk, "I am a busy man. State your purpose." "My purpose," said Holmes, his voice quiet, yet carrying an edge of steel, "concerns the disappearance of a young inventor by the name of Alistair Finch." If Holmes had expected a reaction, he was disappointed. Sir Gideon's heavy features remained impassive. "Finch? Ah, yes, the gyroscope fellow. Talented but naive. What of him?" "He vanished from his workshop last night under circumstances that suggest foul play. You recently made him an offer for his patents, an offer which he refused." "I did," Croft admitted without hesitation. "His design had merit. My offer was generous. He was a fool to decline it. But business is business. I have no time for petulant geniuses. His disappearance is no concern of mine." "You were most displeased by his refusal, I'm told," Holmes pressed. A flicker of anger showed in the industrialist's eyes. "I am not accustomed to being denied what I want, Mr. Holmes, but I am not a kidnapper. My time is worth more than that. I shall simply develop my own stabilizer, and in a year Mr. Finch and his little toy will be a forgotten footnote." He puffed on a thick, dark cigar. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have a factory to run." The interview was over. As we walked away from the factory, the roar of the machinery fading behind us, I felt a sense of deflation. "A dead end, Holmes?" I asked. "On the contrary, Watson," he replied, his eyes gleaming. It was most illuminating. Did you observe the cigar box on his desk? It contained expensive Cuban cigars. The ash in the tray was from one such cigar. Yet the ash in the stove at Finch's workshop was from a Turkish cigarette. Sir Gideon is a creature of habit. He is not our man. However, did you notice the state of his boots? They seemed perfectly ordinary to me. But they were not. They were large, heavy-soled boots, caked in fresh mud. And on the right boot, just above the welt, was a smear of yellow clay, identical to that which we saw on Miss Vance's shoe. Our formidable industrialist has recently taken a trip in a hansom cab. But more importantly, the mud on his boots was mixed with a fine grey dust. Coal dust. Not the sort one finds in a domestic scuttle, but the specific type used in the furnaces of steamships. Good heavens, Holmes, what can that mean? It means that our investigation must now take us to the docks, my dear fellow. To the dark, fog-bound heart of the River Thames. The men who took Finch are not interested in his patents for their own sake. They plan to take the invention, and possibly the inventor himself, out of the country. This has ceased to be a simple case of industrial rivalry. We are now dealing with international espionage. Our inquiries at the bustling Pool of London were initially fruitless. The fog was even thicker here, muffling the sounds of ships' horns and the cries of the stevedores. We trudged from wharf to wharf, Holmes making discreet inquiries of shipping agents and harbour masters, his questions couched in the casual language of a merchant seeking passage for goods. It was late in the afternoon when we found ourselves in a seedy tavern near the Wapping Old Stairs, a place frequented by the rough crews of the tramp steamers that plied their trade across the globe. Holmes had disguised himself as a common sailor, a transformation so complete in dress, manner and speech that I myself would have been deceived had I not been party to it. His efforts were soon rewarded. From a grizzled old boatswain with a fondness for rum, he learned of a German cargo ship, the Falk, which had been taking on an unusual crate late last night. The crate was long and heavy, and handled with extreme secrecy by a private crew, not the regular dock hands. The ship was due to sail on the evening tide in less than 2 hours. "It all fits, Watson," Holmes hissed, his face flushed with excitement as we hurried from the tavern. "The smaller man with the Turkish cigarettes is likely the agent, the mastermind. The brute in the heavy boots, one of his hired thugs. They have Finch, and they are taking him and his knowledge to Germany, where the Kaiser is desperate to build a navy to rival our own. We must intercept them before the Falk weighs anchor." We raced back to Baker Street in the fastest cab we could find. There, Holmes scribbled a hasty note. "Watson, take this to Inspector Lestrade at Scotland Yard. Tell him to meet us with a dozen of his best men at the West India Docks, Pier 4. Tell him it is a matter of national security. I, in the meantime, have another trail to follow, a loose end that has been troubling me." "What is it, Holmes?" "The fashionably dressed young girl, Watson. Miss Eleanor Vance. There is something about her performance that does not ring true. Her grief was a little too perfect, her fashionable attire a little too studied. I must see her one last time." I did as I was bid, and by the time I returned to Baker Street, having dispatched the message to a gratifyingly alarmed Lestrade, Holmes was pacing the room once more, his brow furrowed in deep thought. "What did you learn, Holmes?" "I learned," he said slowly, "that Miss Vance's father, Lord Harrington, lost his entire fortune 2 years ago in a disastrous stock market venture. They have been living on borrowed time and credit ever since. An engagement to a brilliant and soon-to-be wealthy inventor like Alistair Finch would have been their salvation. Her distress, it seems, is entirely genuine." I felt a pang of sympathy for the poor girl. "Then she is in no way involved?" "So it would seem," Holmes said, though a shadow of doubt still lingered in his eyes. And yet, there is no time for speculation now. To the docks, Watson. The tide waits for no man, and neither does the German Empire. The scene at the West India docks was one of controlled chaos. The fog had begun to lift, but a damp, chilling mist still clung to the water. The hulking silhouette of the Falk was visible against the greasy lights of the pier, steam already beginning to hiss from its funnel. Inspector Lestrade, looking flustered but determined, met us with a phalanx of uniformed constables. "Holmes, what is the meaning of this? National security, your note said." "It is nothing less, Inspector," Holmes replied grimly. "A British inventor, along with secrets vital to the Royal Navy, are aboard that vessel. We must board her and recover them before she sails." Under the authority of Lestrade's warrant, we stormed up the gangplank, taking the German crew entirely by surprise. The captain, a furious bearded man, protested vehemently, but he was no match for a dozen determined London policemen. Holmes led the charge, his deductions guiding our search. "A heavy trunk dragged across the floor," he muttered. "They would have placed him in the hold. Watson, Lestrade, this way." We descended a series of steep iron ladders into the cavernous, lamplit hold of the ship. It was filled with crates of all shapes and sizes. After a frantic 10-minute search, one of Lestrade's men gave a shout. He had found it, tucked away behind a stack of barrels, a large, reinforced travelling trunk with metal feet that matched the scratches on the workshop floor. With a crowbar, we prized open the lid. I braced myself for a grim discovery, but the trunk was empty, save for a thick layer of packing straw. Lestrade stared, his face a mask of bewilderment. "But, Holmes, where is he?" Holmes did not answer. He was staring into the empty trunk, his face pale and set in the gaslight. For the first time since I had known him, the great Sherlock Holmes looked utterly and completely defeated. "I have been a fool, Watson," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "A magnificent, unparalleled fool. I have been played like a violin from the very start. The ship, the Germans, Sir Gideon, it was all a distraction, a grand piece of misdirection." "But Holmes, what do you mean?" I cried. "The real crime," he said, turning his haunted eyes upon me, "was never here. We must return to Baker Street at once, and pray we are not too late." The journey back was a torment of silent anxiety. Holmes sat hunched in the corner of the cab, his face a grim mask, lost in a furious torrent of thought. He offered no explanation, and I knew better than to ask. When we burst back into our rooms at 221B, we were met with a scene of quiet devastation. The drawers of Holmes's desk had been forced, his chemical table was in disarray, and his carefully organised index of criminal records was scattered across the floor. Mrs. Hudson met us on the landing, her face white with fear. "Mr. Holmes, a young woman came. She said she was Miss Vance's sister and that you had sent her to collect some papers for the case. I didn't think to question it." But Holmes was no longer listening. He was standing in the centre of the room, staring at a small white calling card left propped against the mantelpiece clock. He picked it up and read the elegant feminine script aloud. "You sought the inventor, but it was the invention that mattered. A pity you were so easily distracted. The world's greatest detective, it seems, has a weakness for a damsel in distress. I.A." "I.A.?" I queried, utterly baffled. "There is only one woman in the world who would dare, Watson," Holmes said, a strange mixture of fury and admiration in his voice. "The woman, Irene Adler." "Irene Adler? But she is in Bohemia, married." "Or so we were led to believe. It appears she has returned to her old profession, and this time her employer is the German government. Watson, do you not see the breathtaking simplicity and audacity of her plan? She knew I would investigate the disappearance of Finch. She constructed the entire scenario, the distraught fiancé, the ruthless rival, the sinister foreign power, to send me on a wild goose chase to the docks. But Miss Vance? Miss Vance was a pawn, just as we were. A truly distressed young woman whose genuine panic was the cornerstone of the entire deception. Adler likely paid her handsomely for her unwitting role, a sum sufficient to restore her family's fortunes. While we were chasing shadows on the River Thames, Adler, or an agent of hers, came here. But why here, Holmes? What was she after? Holmes walked over to his desk and pointed to a small, hidden compartment, now broken open and empty. Before Mr. Finch disappeared, he grew fearful. He suspected someone was watching him. 3 days ago, he came to me in secret. He did not want to launch a full investigation, merely to deposit something for safekeeping. He entrusted to me the only complete and annotated set of schematics for his gyroscopic stabilizer. The papers in his workshop were a clever but incomplete duplicate set. Adler's spies must have learned of his visit. The entire abduction was a charade, designed for one purpose only: to get me, the guardian of the plans, out of Baker Street for a few crucial hours. He sank into his armchair, the calling card still clutched in his hand. The fire had burned low, and the first light of a grim, foggy dawn was beginning to seep into the room. "And the thumb, Holmes?" I asked in a low voice. "Good God, the thumb must mean that Finch's—" "No, Watson," Holmes said, a faint, weary smile touching his lips. "That was her one stroke of pure genius, the detail that convinced me the threat was real. But Finch is a man of science. The thumb was real, yes, but it was not his. It would have been procured from a hospital morgue or a dissecting room. A perfect piece of theatrical misdirection. I imagine Mr. Finch is at this very moment alive and well, though likely very confused, locked in a room somewhere until Adler and the plans are safely on their way to the continent. He will be released in a day or two with a story of having been robbed and held by common criminals." He fell silent, staring into the embers. The case was over. We had been outmaneuvered, outthought, and utterly defeated. The secrets of the gyroscopic stabilizer were lost to us on their way to a rival power. And the architect of it all was a woman whom Holmes, in his own way, held in the highest esteem. "She is a remarkable woman, Watson," he said at last, his voice soft. "A truly remarkable woman. In the world of crime, she is what our fashionably dressed young girl was in the world of society, an artist. And today, the artist has surpassed the critic. And so ended the only case I can recall in which we were so comprehensively beaten. A humbling affair that began with a cry for help and a grisly token, and ended in an empty room, with the ghost of a calling card and the lingering, undeniable genius of Irene Adler.